Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by The Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. Today, we're going to be talking about the elements of art and the principles of design, and ask the question, are the elements and principles overrated? I'm going to be talking a little bit about the benefits and some of the drawbacks that come when you use the elements and principles to guide your curriculum. Okay, and there's been a little bit of movement lately to kind of get rid of the elements and principles. And my question is, if we decide to get rid of them, where do we go from there? Okay, and overall, where do these things fit in our curriculum? Okay, they can guide it. Do they play a small part in a bigger picture? Okay, or should we get rid of them altogether? Okay, I'm going to ask that of a couple of great art teachers that'll be on the show with me, Andrew McCormick and Melissa Purtee. And as I talk to them, I'm going to share with you kind of how my thinking has evolved on the elements and principles, where as a beginning teacher, I really thought that they were the end all be all, okay, where they should guide almost everything that I did. And that common language, really sets our students up for success at the next level. And as I talk to Andrew and a little bit as we talk to Melissa as well, I'll share kind of how my thinking has evolved and where I want to go from there. Okay, where I think we should be as art teachers, where they fit in, okay, and what we can do with the elements and principles. And that's going to be different for everyone. But I think a conversation about that is good to get everyone thinking about where they are personally and where they want their students to be. Okay, and I want to jump right in the conversation. We have a lot to talk about today. So I'm going to bring on Andrew in just a second, and a couple minutes after that, Melissa will join the show as well. Before we get to that, however, I want to talk a little bit about AOE's choice-based art education course. It is a great course for finding just the right level of choice for your own classroom. Okay, in that course, you're going to look at Tab, Montessori, Reggio, and all kinds of other approaches to find just the right amount of autonomy for your students, that you are comfortable with. Okay, it's a 3-credit-hour course. It begins on the 1st of every month. You can check out theartofed.com/courses for more details. I know a lot of people are going to be tuning in to this show because both Andrew and even more so Melissa are big names in the world of art education, or choice-based art education. And I think having them on is a good segue into that sort of choice-based art education course. So if you like a little bit of what you hear from Andrew and what you hear from Melissa, that class is definitely worth checking out. Okay, but let's go ahead and jump right in. I want to bring Andrew on right now. All right, Andrew McCormick, you are here, and you were here early today. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Running errands with the kids this summer, but I'm doing good.
All right, cool. Well, we are diving into your personal favorite, the elements and principles.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to tell a little story here, and I want to kind of just get your reaction to it before we bring Melissa on.
Okay.
Okay. So when I was an undergrad, we were having all these discussions about, the elements of art, the principles of design, how important are they? And I was really passionate about, our kids have to know this, they have to have that common language. They have to be able to, converse with that, because that's how people talk about art. And my professor brought up to me, she's like, Tim, are you sure this is how everybody talks about art? Are you sure that the elements of art and principles of design are really that important? And I absolutely freaked out because, not in class, I didn't freak out, but just the whole way home from class, I'm just thinking about this, what if, my high school kids go to college and they don't know about, radial balance? How are they even going to do critiques? And I just thought I was failing my kids if they didn't know everything about the elements of art and principles of design before they go off to college. And it's taken me about, 14, 15 years, but, I finally come around to realize that, the elements and principles are not the end all be all. So what was it for you? What really made you come around to kind of realize that?
Oh, well, for me, I've been a long time advocate that there's a whole lot more to art than that. I mean, even in undergrad, like I kind of knew that there was more. But I want to go back to your story, and then I really enjoyed thinking about when your professor asked you, is that really all that people talk about when they talk about art, or is that the way that they talk about art? I got to thinking like, no, like I know, like when I go to the museum with people and I'll say like, oh, I love this, color here or the value here and the way that they use line here. I feel like I'm a big old fat fraud phony. Like I'm a caricature of a person going to the museum. What I actually think people at a more guttural level talk about when they look at art is, the sort of evocative or the message that was conveyed there. So the meaning, the context, the sort of association. And I'm not saying like, that's better than a principles elements type of talk, but like I think there's a lot more various nuanced ways that people talk about art and get into art. So, back to me, I think it was in undergrad, I read a book called Air Guitar Nation by an art critic named Dave Hickey, and he has an essay called Why Art Should Be Bad. And and it was kind of this essay on like, it's really good to be daring and to be bold and make a lot of stuff, and it's okay if it all kind of sucks. And it got me to think and work in a much more loose way. So I think that's transferred over to my own students in that I pay a little bit of respect to principles and elements, but we go over them very, very quickly and get on to bigger, deeper things.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way to go about it. And I think Melissa agrees quite a bit with you. And I also want to ask her kind of, about discussions, critiques, and kind of how she's teaching that as well. So let's go ahead and bring her on right now. Melissa, how are you?
I'm awesome. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So let's go ahead and jump in and kind of start with the question we ask in the title of the show. Do you think the elements and principles are overrated? Do you think that art teachers focus on them a little bit too much?
Yeah, I think they're just one of many things art teachers can focus on, and they just get kind of stuck there sometimes, and they focus on them way too much.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a lot that can kind of go beyond, just the elements and principles and so much more that's kind of there. So, Andrew, what are some of the things that you like to do that kind of go beyond elements and principles? Just basic ideas, basic things that you like to do.
Well, I mean, I've done, a sort of a modified choice. Like I do talk about themes quite a bit. So we'll come up with themes. One of my favorite things to do is towards the end of the semester, because I kind of realize, when I come up with themes, it's still a little art teacher centric, like it's the theme that I think will be good and resonate. But at the end of the semester, the last couple projects, the kids, we collectively start brainstorming, what do artists make artwork about and what would those look like as sort of a theme or jumping off point? And I think that just has kind of a richer sort of understanding of, or it's a richer way for students to engage with art in its communicative abilities, I think, than just this is line, this is value, this is shape. And, my big thing is it's not that I abandon the elements and principles. Like I still talk about those and I think that they're still deliberately taught. It's just not as heavy. It's not as big a focus,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think, the big key, like you said, is not just limiting it to the elements and principles, but like weaving them in with the bigger topics.
Yeah. So, hey, Melissa, I know we've both kind of been advocates for, that as art teachers, we can do more than just the elements and principles. And we've both written articles for AOE that either specifically or maybe even in a roundabout way kind of talks about doing more than just the elements and principles. And collectively on like Facebook and social media, art teachers out there have lost their ever-loving minds over this. Why do you think that talking about the elements and principles becomes such a contentious issue?
I think people want to do what's best for their students, and we've been told that this, teaching this is important. And people don't like to be told that what they're doing is wrong. It challenges their paradigm. And I think it takes people a minute to think about it and process it. when I decided to back away from the elements and principles, it was, something that happened really slowly over time. If someone would have said, hey, that lesson kind of sucks, I I might be offended. And I think, in a roundabout way, both you and I have questioned the validity of focusing on the elements and principles as much as we do. Not that we think anyone's lesson sucks, but sometimes it can sound like that. So that's hard. People want to do the best for their kids.
Yeah. So just kind of a follow up there. Like, I guess I'll ask you, Melissa, first, and then Andrew, you can chime in too. Like, do you really think that the elements and principles are not valid anymore? Or do you think we just need to find a different way to do it?
If you would have asked me that 2 or 3 years ago, I was at the point where I was thinking, we just need to not teach them. But no, yeah. I think they're valid. I think they're part of the language of art. I think when they're taught holistically, instead of just focusing on one in this kind of false context that this lesson is just about line, when really, no artwork is just about line. They're being taught holistically. I think they're very valid, as long as they're included with an emotional response to art and thinking about art in a context. As long as those other things are included as well, I think the language of the elements and principles is great. Now, does it have to be called elements and principles to teach that language? No, most kids know what the words, line and color and shape are without that kind of really formal context that we give them, the elements and principles. So that's, another subject for debate. But yes, I think that they're still should be part of our curriculum. And I've actually, in the last year or two, planned some units that use them. So my stance on that has changed a bit as well.
All right, very cool.
Andrew, I do think that semantics is kind of a good way because, I actually think that kids have, when I've seen teachers do this. All right, boys and girls, today we're learning about the elements and principles and specifically line and balance. And it's just like, you can watch the kids, like their enthusiasm, like drain out of their body. But if you were to say like, okay, we're going to study line and balance because these are really kind of the building blocks of how people make artwork that's effective and communicates an idea. Okay, like that's a piece of the puzzle. Or I've even heard people refer to them as kind of the rules and tools, right? Like the tools are kind of like the elements, how you build something, and the rules are the principles. And here's how you kind of arrange things. So, we've kind of agreed this looks pleasing. But then what I like about that is you can say, and like now that you know the rules, like rules are great to break and like kind of break out of those conventions. And you can show students, all sorts of artists who have done that. I want to ask you, because it sounds like even though I've been a staunch believer that art is more than just the building blocks, and there's never been a kid who's been excited to come to school and be like, today I'm going to make artwork about line. Yeah. Like that doesn't really grab their spirit. I used to teach in a very traditional way. And you have kind of mentioned that you've evolved too. Do you think that there's been, or that there was, a loss in quality control? Like I used to feel like my students' work was pretty unified and pretty like averagely good. And when I kind of strayed away from a heavy focus on elements and principles, I got like a wide spectrum of quality and all of that. Did you experience the same thing?
I think it's been years since it sounds to me like when you're talking about your definition of good, you're thinking about how the work looks aesthetically. Mm-hmm. My definition of good is really, what is it saying? What does it mean? What growth does it show in disabilities? And who came up with the idea and made it happen? And how is the student doing in learning about those things? So, yeah, I think that there's always a variety in success with pieces, especially when you're talking about aesthetically. But I think the definition of good has to include, those other things about process. I for the last year have organized all my lessons around something I call design process thinking that teaches, the planning, idea generation, designing, coming up with ideas. And I feel like teaching that framework has helped the aesthetic quality of the work that's produced. It gives students who kind of are challenged by the open-ended format of choice-based lessons. It gives them a really solid, tangible framework to work from. I don't think I ever really focused very solely on elements and principles. I included them begrudgingly because I felt like I should. At some point, I decided, I'm just not going to do that. So
I love that answer because, funny, I never thought about I've thought that quality has changed, but I've never really thought about the definition of quality changing. So I think when I taught elements and principles, I thought of quality, and I got to admit, I think I was way off base now. Does their work look like I thought it was going to look like as I prescribed it? I told them you have to do this, this, and this. And if it looks like this, this, and this, that's quality. Well, now I don't know what it's going to look like. And I actually think that's a sign of quality that they took it in very different ways. And then sort of a second tier definition of quality is how effective were you at communicating your idea? And that's when you can get into those ideas of building blocks why did you use such crappy colors here? Maybe a different color, principles and elements would have been more effective. So, yeah, I really like that answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like that too. And, I kind of want to transition this into critiques as well. And I think that's a good point that you just brought up, Andrew, because a lot of teachers, when you talk about this idea of ditching the elements and principles, and how do we talk about art? What about that common language? So, Melissa, you talked a little bit about, what you want to see from kids' work, what kind of qualities you're looking for. So can you talk a little bit too about how you run critiques? Do you talk more about the meaning of things? And if you're talking to a teacher who's questioning you, how would I do critiques without, talking about the elements and principles? What would you tell them?
Well, I think you're referring to group critiques. I teach critical thinking in two ways. The main way I teach it, students thinking critically about their work, is through either blogging or conferencing or presentations. Those are how I have students reflect and think critically about their work. And I work on using that, the language of some principles, as well as forming personal connections and thinking about how their work is expressive and communicative in that way. As far as group critiques go, my main focus is celebrating the accomplishment and making a personal connection in response to the work. That language of the elements and principles we talk about, and it's in there, but it's not a focus for me. I don't think. I think sometimes we miss the forest for the trees when we have vocabulary be more important than content.
Yeah, I would agree completely. So that's cool. All right, Andrew. What about you? Your critiques, how do you focus yours?
I'd say pretty similar to Melissa's, where we're really, principles and elements come up when we start thinking about the effectiveness of the communication of the idea. But I think the biggest thing we get is a kind of gut level reaction to how individual was the response, how unique was it, what are they trying to say. In a lot of ways, I think that as I've shifted away from, okay, they did a good job with all their 7 values, yes or no. Right? That's kind of what it used to look like. To what did the artist do here, and how is it resonating in you? That's kind of what I would consider to be a more authentic art experience. I don't go to the museum and try to say well, I would like this painting a lot more if it had a better use of values. I kind of get into it on sort of that more emotional level. So I think that my critiques reflect that a lot better now.
Yeah, and I think if you're just focusing on elements and principles when you do a critique, I feel like you're just kind of at the base level. There's not a lot of higher order thinking skills right there. If you're just going through your rubric, and is the composition good? Did you do 7 values? That's not a good way to critique. And I think, you can connect with art, like you said, Andrew, on so many different levels that I think we're kind of doing our kids a disservice if all we're talking about is the elements and principles.
Yeah. Well, that brings up kind of a question I'm going to spring on Melissa. I know sometimes we run our questions by our guests, and I was going to ask a question that just seems stupid. So I'm going to spring one on you here, Melissa. I think we're all in agreement that if we have a curriculum that really focuses too heavily on these the elements and principles, we're really missing out on a lot, right? So there's this great article by Olivia Goody where she puts forth a new set of 7 guidelines or principles and elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say in Melissa's world, she's going to replace the elements and principles with a new set of sort of guiding ideas that all artists should get and all art should be about. Can you think of like some big ideas that you think are essential in your curriculum and in the work of your students?
Ooh, that's a tough one. And I don't know if I can list them, but I've definitely thought that. Ian Sands and I developed this list of artistic behaviors. And there are definitely more than 7 at this point. But I mean, I guess hearkening back to kind of Catherine Douglas and the development of TAB, for me, it would start with artists can have an idea and pursue it. So that idea of, teaching for creative thinking is essential. Solving problems and experimenting, knowing how to make design solutions is also key. Making work that is expressive and has personal context, moving from making artwork about things that you're interested in to artwork that says something and connects with people and has personal voice is something that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think, Andrew, that's a really tough question to spring on somebody with with no warning. But
it totally is. But man, Melissa, you nailed it. Don't even be fake modest about it. Like, oh, that's going to be hard. Da 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 da.
I've been doing a lot of writing this summer.
That was awesome.
Okay, so let me go ahead and wrap things up, though. One last question for you. If you are focused on, personal expression and communication and student voice and all of those things, where do the elements and principles fit in at that point? Like, where can they or where should they? Like, as we're moving forward, we've agreed that we don't want to ditch the elements and principles completely, but where do they fit in for you?
For me, they fit in, and I'm going to talk elementary and high school. Middle school. I've never been there. In elementary, they fit in student-directed lessons, posting them, talking about that vocabulary, but instead of showing a Van Gogh painting and saying, let's make artwork with lines, say, what do you see? Text, color, all those things are there. And not just talking about the elements and the principles, but also the personal connection to the work, I think is essential there too. So not limiting it to the elements and principles, but having those be present and introduced and the teacher modeling the language. In high school, finding work that students see those things evident in is a way that I've done it that I really like. I do a unit called Artists Understand Elements, where I have my Art 1 students, I put them in groups and have them research an element and do a presentation about it and find work from different time periods and, kind of across, from a wide variety of cultural contexts and time periods that exemplifies it to them. And then, so all the groups, that all the elements are represented and groups do presentation. So they build sort of a student-directed common knowledge of what the elements are, right? And then afterwards, the students individually pick from any of the elements presented and do an artwork inspired by them. So I think that's a good kind of student-directed, holistic way to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like, excellent suggestions there. All right, Andrew, any closing thoughts before we sign out of here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we've said this a number of times. It's not an either or. It's not like you have to either do elements and principles or something new and different. You can have the best of both worlds. It's kind of a balancing act in knowing what you think is best for your students. Mm-hmm. To answer the question you pitched to Melissa, I've been doing the sort of like 1 week long kind of mini project exercise where I kind of get my elements and principles kind of like done and talked about and practiced. And then it's kind of a jumping off point to a bigger project that's more individual. And that for me has been a good way to kind of have my cake and eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So cool. All right. Well, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Andrew. It's been an awesome conversation, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Melissa. Bye.
Bye.
All right, that will do it for this episode. So a big thank you for Melissa and for Andrew for coming on the show. It was a great conversation, and obviously we'll talk to Andrew quite a bit, but hopefully we can have Melissa back on as well. And I really hope more than anything that everybody who's listening to this can take away a few ideas, not necessarily to change what you do in your classroom, but at least spend some time thinking about and reflecting on how you use the elements of art and the principles of design in your class. Okay, and as you reflect, maybe you find out that you are using them the best way for you and the best way for your students. Or maybe you're finding out that you need to change what you do, and either direction is fine. Okay, whatever you decide works best for you is what you should be doing. Okay, but my hope is that this conversation can spur a little bit of thought and a little bit of reflection. So take some time, read some articles by Andrew, by Melissa. We'll post them in the show notes. You can link to those and check out some more things and be thinking a little bit more about how you deal with the elements and principles in your room. And like I said, what you can do to best serve your students. My thinking has evolved on it quite a bit since I first started teaching. Maybe yours will as well. But no matter what you do, no matter how you decide you're going to approach them, like we said, whatever you think works best for you is what we're going to support. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. Please subscribe to Art Ed Radio on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. You can also find us on artedradio.com, where we'll put up the show notes, some great articles from Andrew and Melissa, and you can also sign up for the email where every week, Andrew and I come to your inbox with a little intro to the show, a little bit of humor, a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what we do, and some good recommendations for some other podcasts, articles, videos, reading, all sorts of good stuff. So anyway, make sure you subscribe to the email list and to Art Ed Radio. New episodes are released every Tuesday, so we will see you again next week. And as always, thanks for listening.